Yeah, I was in one of the richest streets in Mayfair, and there was just walking down the street. There was a guy in front of me, and I saw him get his phone stolen, and this guy on the motorbike basically swerved in and like just grabbed it, and it all happened in like the space of 10 seconds. And my heart dropped, and the people around me, their heart dropped. We were like, "Whoa!" And we just watched this guy kind of like run after and try and get his phone. And it kind of hit me as a tough reality about London. If you're a rich person in London, I mean, and this stuff is happening with sort of knife crime and watches being stolen and pickpocketers, it's like I don't think it's like I think that's a big problem for rich people because you can just go to a very safe city. There's safe cities out there that exist like Dubai, which would be much more practical for their life, maybe in the way that things are heading. Like this is Mayfair. This is a luxury place where there shouldn't be any crime, but this is happening right in front of my eyes. So anyway, that happened, and that kind of sparked the kind of my my journey that day. And then there was kind of a more situation. So that happened, and I I think I take for granted essentially my safety because when I'm in Southampton or Exeter, I don't think about my safety. Like, and that might be because I'm a tall guy where like I'm fairly in shape these days, and I feel like I can handle conflict, and it's never been a problem. But when I'm in London, I was anxious, and I feel like when you're in London, you've got to be more on guard. And like I've had experiences before where I was in Pret and some guy just randomly started shouting at me, um, and I guess it got me thinking that you can kind of tell when someone is from London. If you meet someone at uni and they're from London, you can kind of tell by the way they move. So anyway, after that happens, I was on a tube very late. I was on a tube at midnight, and I was kind of getting like just Raskolnikov vibes from Crime and Punishment from some of these guys because I was pretty vulnerable. I was drunk, and people were kind of looking at me. I didn't like the way people were looking at me.
For those who don't know, including myself, what do you mean by Raskolnikov vibes? Because obviously I know the name and I know the book, but I haven't read it.
I'll go into it.
Okay.
But so essentially, I'm on this train. I'm drunk. I'm with a girl, and these guys are looking at the girl I'm with's ass, and it's like I kind of feel like I have to stare them down. It's not good, right? I'm around some people that are not good guys, and I think I am just kind of observing this spirit that has possessed people from acts of evil. And so when I kind of conceptualize what we're talking about with the villain journey, I think the villain journey is a cycle where you commit an evil act, you get away with it, and then the more you do that, the more your soul decays, and the more you metaphysically carry punishment around with you. So you kind of, well, I was seeing these characters that have violated moral law potentially, then they get away with it, and then your behavior towards others kind of gets cold as a result of that getting away with it. And that's what I think this cycle is. And I don't think I'm speculating too much when I'm seeing this shadow and animal sort of behavior rubbing off of guys in my tube experience. And what Dostoevsky sort of speaks about with Raskolnikov is um Raskolnikov kind of like tries to justify his immorality, and his as a result his when he gets away with it, and as a result his identity becomes bleak. He becomes a very anxious person. He kind of self sabotages himself socially. He has a really bad relationship with his mother's and his sister, and he kind of sees his relationships with people as a burden. And it kind of, I mean, I kind of hinted at um, this villain journey here being a cycle of specifically getting away with something evil and then doing something more evil as a result because because you've got away with it before and your character is even more decayed. And I think I applied Raskolnikov because he's a very good example of getting away with something. That's essentially Dostoyevsky's message: is getting away with something is worse than getting punished, because at least when you get punished, your character has then time to reflect and you have time to change. When you don't get punished,
Mm.
then your character decays and it gets worse.
And is there even such thing as getting away with it when it comes to acts that breach moral laws? I mean, like, I think that book is about he murders someone, right? And no one finds out and he lives with that burden. That doesn't mean he got away with it. That means nobody knows he did it. But the psychological like hell that he goes into in the book just shows you don't get away with it. Like no one gets away with anything because you have to sit with yourself all the time. I do want to read that book, though. I really do.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what people don't think about when they're committing evil. They don't think about how it's going to harm their character or
Mm.
turn them more satanic. And all I'm trying to say with my London experience is that's the vibe that I got with people have committed some kind of evil act and then have gotten away with it, and as a result, their energy's very off to me. That's just what I observed. So yeah, I'll let you talk.
I like this, right? Because firstly, we're going to build on a concept we talked about in a previous episode, which I think is good, and shows that it's a deep idea and there's a lot of value to it. Secondly, I like that you've got this sort of anecdotal evidence of things that your gut has sort of picked up, and I'm now going to try and bring in a model based on a book that I haven't read, but I read the sort of summary um, of the key ideas that kind of puts it all together. Um, so I guess to set the scene a little bit more, if people want to listen to the previous Jacob and Joel episode before this one, we were trying to figure out more on this problem of evil and why people do evil things and how we define evil. And so, firstly, I want to separate evil people and people doing evil things because I don't think evil people exist. I think there is a moral law to what it means to be a good human, and this is what sort of faith systems point to, and people breach that moral law. And becoming a villain or going through this villain's journey that I'm about to lay out is purely just when people breach that moral law. It doesn't make them an evil person, it means they're going down an evil path. And as you'll see in the model, they can either recover themselves or they go further and further down into the depths of hell. And I think your observation about the cyclical structure of things will become apparent as I go into this. So, firstly, I think the villain's journey is the exact opposite to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which we've talked a lot about. The hero's journey is like a framework to view life where if you act it out and follow its principles, it will lead you to the good life. Not just a life of pleasure and hedonism, but a good life where you develop character and you take on obstacles and you bring back value for your community and you gain wisdom in yourself and all those kind of higher virtues and values, right? And sitting at the opposite of that hero's journey is this villain's journey, which is a guaranteed framework. If you act it out in your life, it leads to the bad. It leads to immorality and pain and harm to oneself and others, etc., etc. Now, to go back to something we use a lot as an analogy, the study with the rats on the spring and measuring the force if it like smelt cheese in front of it, and then measuring the force if it smelt a cat behind it, and then measuring the force if it smelt a cat behind it and cheese in front of it. The hero's journey you can think about as, I don't know, philosophical cheese that one should be chasing, a positive framework to view life. Whereas the villain's journey is the smell of the cat behind you. And I think anyone listening to this, any person in the world, should have an understanding of both of these things to know what they should be chasing and what they should be running away from. And the villain's journey is a life framework that we should be running away from. Now, the model I'm going to use comes from a lady called Valerie Estelle Frankel, and she wrote a book about villains in literature. Basically, it's kind of like a Joseph Campbell-esque book about modeling what the villain's arc is in stories and using a bunch of stories from pop culture and history and mythology to outline her points. I mean, she used a lot of characters that people would know, like Severus Snape, for example, and like Darth Vader from Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. And she kind of used the same cyclical model as Joseph Campbell, where there was three key stages of the villain's journey, and these are the points we're going to focus on. So it starts with the villain experiences estrangement from the community that leaves an emotional wound. So that could be a lack of love from parents or a guardian figure that estranges them from that fundamental community of parent and infant. And that could be bullied at school, or never quite having friends, being socially isolated, being ostracized in the community. That isolation, it begins that sort of sense of resentment and pain and emotional pain, leaving that emotional wound. Then secondly, and this is when they sort of go into that villain unknown world, right? They go on the villain's adventure, to sort of invert Joseph Campbell's term. They go through a series of trials where the self is prioritized over the community, right? Betrayal and cruelty is chosen over friendship and heroism. They choose to damage others for personal gain, and that potentially is fueled by the emotional wound. Um, and that's the longest stage, right? But then when they come to the end of that particular villain cycle, two things happen, right? Well, one of two things happen. They're either defeated by the hero, which we see in many great, popular stories, like, Harry Potter killing Voldemort, etc., etc., or they experience self-mastery and redemption and begin the path to be good and become an anti-hero. Severus Snape is a great example of this in his villain arc, that when he dies, we realize he was actually the good guy, and his whole arc changes and he becomes an anti-hero. Not to spoil Harry Potter for anyone who's not seen it, but I just did. And these are some extra points that I added. I don't know if Valerie Frankel put this in her book, but I think the model becomes cyclical because when the villain becomes defeated by the hero, that creates further estrangement from the community and further emotional wounds. If you think about it, in a lot of stories, when the villain is defeated by the hero, the community laughs at the villain. They become a laughing stock. They become further and further rejected. And then this hellish cycle can therefore only end when the villain becomes an anti-hero and enters a stage of redemption and tries to be a good guy. And then final point before I open back to you again is, I think also perhaps at the end of each villain cycle, the individual has a choice to become good, this self-redemption. And it brings me back to Alex Hormozy's quote about the main difference between a hero and a villain is how they use their pain. A hero alchemizes pain to bring good into the world, whereas a villain wants others to feel pain because they felt pain. So that emotional wound that is still with them, at the end of the cycle, they can either choose to change it and make a force of good, or continue down this like cycle into further and further and greater depths of hell. Now, I have one or two more points of what interests me about the specific details in that cycle, that kind of branches into other things, like some other things that I've read and other quotes and stuff. But I'll pause there and see if that resonates with you and if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, super resonates with me. It makes sense that there's going to be some kind of isolation or not fitting into people at the start, and then I have a lot on this concept of serving the self, and that is like crystal clear about essentially what being a villain really is, because I think the religious texts highly point up to is it's like thinking with the mind is like more towards God, and thinking with the body is more towards Satan or the desires of the body. It's a total big distinction you can make. And yeah, I think I think about with the thing with serving the self is applied a lot with Dante. So every kind of thing Dante talks about is towards the self and it's towards the flesh. So when you think about how, I mean, things like greed, lust, and I can't remember some of the other. They come to mind.
Pride, gluttony.
Yeah, that's it. Hoarders is another one as well. I mean Dante, he the reason actually why Dante rates the reason Dante rates lust as the least harmful deadly sin is because it's a mutual exchange between two people. So it's not necessarily wholly selfish because there's another person also involved who's also after the same thing.
Mm.
it's a mutual exchange. Both parties are pushing themselves to hell. It's not just one person. And yeah, it's that's what I was very clearly correlated with it being the more you serve the self, the kind of worse you go down. And I think about, I think Dante just he's very good to apply here because how this is kind of like a cycle. There's Dante sort of talks about the layers in which these cycles exist. So circle three was Dante separated it into I think 7 circles of hell, and then there was like 4 other ones which were kind of like bonuses and kind of additional ones.
Bonus hell.
Yeah, essentially. And circle three was about the gluttonous, and he used like examples of this like three-headed dog, which you also see in Harry Potter, right? Um, and how because gluttony is in a way I can see that being worse than lust in a way because it's more like it is greedy is taking from others rather than also being on the same sort of doing the same as others. And then circle four, as it is kind of worse than gluttony, it's like hoarders, and he used to call them spendthrifts, and that's people. It's like mass gluttony almost.
Mm.
And then yeah, I think the thing that I really liked about what you said is how so as I mentioned, you got some sort of isolation that then goes to serving the self through some of these things that Dante talks about. And then the hero the villain either becomes a hero or he gets defeated. That's super interesting because that means that the villain never wins. Why does the villain never win? Maybe we can ponder about it, but I mean, when I think like in history, like villains have it makes sense that villains never win, and I'm trying to figure out why because it's almost like the result actually like it doesn't connect, it doesn't create something everlasting. I think there's something in it where you can only serve the self for so long where something becomes where you kind of reach like a dead end almost. If the villain was to win, and that's why he always has to either get defeated or turn into a hero. And lastly, before I pass it on back to you, I think applying when I think about the guy who I saw stole the phone in Mayfair,
Mm.
I'm thinking, okay, so this guy, how did he start out? He must have started out through getting some kind of isolation with his friends, or like maybe he grew up poor and he was in a bad neighborhood and he didn't really feel connected to anything. A lot of it could just be a lack of connection. And then he chooses, well, I have to provide somehow. And I feel like the best way, an easy way is to serve the self and is to take from others. And so what he does is he steals people's phones and he goes on to essentially sell them across the black market, sell them to other countries, sell the parts to other countries, and that's how he gets the money, and that's what those guys do. And therefore he essentially there's no like cost, it's just all profit from that person. And so he keeps on doing that. But eventually he either gets caught from like someone, some security camera picking something up, or someone maybe he has to fight for someone's phone, and that person like swings back and he messes with the wrong person, or he becomes a hero and realizes he has some sort of spiritual experience where he gets an opportunity to do some more other job. Um, but he never wins, I guess.
Mm.
He never builds well, maybe he builds an empire, but an empire with winning phones, but like unless someone double crosses him and then he's fucked, and that's what criminals do. I don't see a reality of him winning. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and I like it. I mean, obviously we're speculating, but I can imagine with that person that would get to a psychological point where they could justify stealing somebody else's phone, they would have to be in a state of financial desperation, and that in itself is an estrangement from the community. That in itself is society has fucked me, I'm at the bottom of the barrel for no reasons of my own. You know what? You are born into a certain community or the government, the state of that country doesn't serve you, or whatever, the system somehow has failed that person. And then that leaves that emotional wound, which then makes them act in immoral ways to serve their self. It does make sense. And yeah, this idea of self-service, it's profound, because look at like the seven deadly sins from Christianity. You can find that self-service in all of them. And I'm reading C.S. Lewis at the moment, not because I'm a Christian or I'm being converted or anything like that, but because I'm trying to find the value in it and see what's there. And one of his chapters, he was talking about pride being the worst possible sin in Christianity, because pride is the me over others. Look how good I am. Look how important I am. Um, and he said pride is interesting because the devil, the devil can use pride to kind of hide, and because people can be proud of like not investing in other vices. So if you don't ever give in to lust, right? That's great. But if you don't ever give in to lust and then you go and tell everybody how much self-control and discipline you have and how good you are and how better you are than them because of it, you're sinning with pride, but it's more silent. It's the way the devil whispers rather than shouting, if you kind of get what I mean. Um, and then like this idea that you can't win doing that. Why does that make sense? Maybe I think it's because even if you do get what you want and you serve the self, that ego has an insatiable hunger. Like you can never fully serve yourself and be happy with yourself, because if you're so if you're so selfish, it's an abyss that can never be filled. Do you know what I mean? It's not like one day your ego goes, okay, I've had enough attention now. I've had enough power now. I've had enough status now. I'm going to stop. No, no, no. That's not in the nature of being ego possessed. And also, this is one point I had before this episode, that this self over the community makes me think of Jordan Peterson's observation, that in the literature on negative emotion, there's not a lot of difference between thinking about yourself and negative emotion. Depression, anxiety, fear, stress, they're all my problems, what I'm afraid of. I'm feeling terrible about myself. I do nothing with my life. It's all I. And the best thing you can possibly do in that situation is serve others, help the community, get out of your own like ego cycle of like rumination about the self and where everything's going wrong. Um, and that's what the villain has to do to become a hero. And I think it just, even if they win and defeat the hero one time, they're still going to be estranged from the community. They're still not going to be liked. All they're doing is kind of feeding the ego possessed, pain fueled like rampage of selfish, immoral behavior that they're in. And so that does make sense. And one thing that I want to just say before I go on, because this was the final bit of the notes I had, um, this researching about this made me think of Solzhenitsyn's line. This is a guy that wrote the Gulag Archipelago and had experiences in like Soviet war camps and things like prison of war camps and things like this, and went through like the harshest suffering. Um, and he had this line where he said, "The line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man." And I kind of think about, if you imagine the two circles of like the hero's journey and the villain's journey, I imagine they overlap within every individual. And which one we choose to go down is the ultimate moral choice that we make in our life. Do we aim towards the good and serve the community and take on what we're afraid of and leave the known world and have an adventure and go through trials and tribulations and eventually bring back wisdom and value to the community? Or do we become estranged from others, have an emotional wound, prioritize ourselves, become ego possessed, and come to the end of our life as an ultimately a villain? Um, and that's the human condition. I think it's true that we sit in the middle of these two journeys. We can take the hero path or the villain path. Some days you take one or the other. Some parts of your life, like some eras of your life, you might take one, you might take the other. We can see it in other people. We can see it in people of history, and that's the moral choice. And people, that's why I feel like it's good to kind of, this is a good point of summary for all our discussions on evil, because people aren't evil. We're not born villains. We become them through emotional wounds. And so, and I think that makes sense when we watch great stories of villains. Like, a lot of them just seem like they need a hug and they need to be told it's going to be all right. Like, people aren't like Voldemort in that they're born evil and they want to cause pain to people. I don't think that's how it works. I think it all comes from they had an emotional wound from being estranged from the community. And like Hormozy said, heroes and villains respond differently to the pains of life. One attempts to alchemize it and become a force for good, and the other attempts to inflict the pain on the world.
Wow. I really love the connection with thinking about yourself and negative emotion, and that's why that's a big reason why the villain doesn't win. Um, I think I think when we were talking about how the reason another reason why the villain doesn't win is because there's egos and in constant pursuits, and the reason they're in constant pursuit is because it's almost like that initial problem, which is the isolation, the estrangement at the start of the cycle, that hasn't got fixed. It's like so much has just been built on top, on top, on top. But it's not. They don't fix the initial problem, and so they're not able to kind of rise from it. They just kind of bury it under so much ego and things. And I think there's a really nice quote from Dante where he says he's Dante sees these sorcerers and with their heads so Dante sees these sorcerers with their heads twisted backwards, and so they're always looking behind themselves, and they're compelled to then walk backwards. And I think he uses the quote the what was it? He uses the quote, the power of looking forward is denied. And for me, that's a big kind of distinction here, is that the villain looks towards the past as the fuel. They don't kind of, whereas the hero would look towards what can I provide now towards the future to make the future better. The
Mm.
hero's holding on to that little bit of the past.
Mm.
That's why the Dante metaphor worked, because it is almost like their heads twisted backwards. They're using, they're trying to, or not fix what happened, but they're moving towards it. They're almost like, it's almost like going back in time and being in that moment mentally, and that's still driving them to do bad things.
Mm.
It's quite powerful. It's revenge. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, you're not moving forward. You're not turning your pain into purpose like the hero is, which is a big distinction here. I think.
Mm.
I think one one thing when you're talking about how the line between good and evil is between it split between every man. Okay, why is that? Well, because especially growing up in the West, we live in an individualistic culture, right? As we've distinguished here, serving the self is one of these big character traits on the path to evil. And I think that my observation in London is why is London more evil than maybe why is London more evil than the Isle of Wight? Because it's way more individualistic, 'cause it's around on materialism and,
Yes.
and the body essentially. It's if you look at the appetites of someone in London,
Yes.
it's like, do you know why? How do you know when you hear people that are like, oh, I don't want to live in a city, I want to live in the countryside. Well, look,
Mm.
key dynamic of what you're surrounded with. Like a lot of people around 30 years old, they they've had enough of it and they want to live about the country. I think that's why people, a big reason is what turns people off, because it's so self-serving, and so you get good things for that, and you get good you get driven, disciplined individuals that are heroes. Because maybe with more things like that, it does become more heroes, but you also get way more villains and so many more problems. So um and so to touch on finally why where I think people go wrong is that I think the devil essentially seduces in small ways first. So you get someone who's you get someone. I think the world, especially. So I'm moving about in London, and the world's screaming at me to eat this fast food and to have this instant gratification and to essentially just serve the self. And you go on Google and you see pictures of women sort of sexualized, and essentially that's just the devil seducing our little ways. And essentially those little ways can become bigger when they're not, that when they sort of manifest, and they and we give them our attention, and that's where we place our attention. So I think this what and then I think that there was constantly seducing. I think you did said that perfectly with pride, in that we're this devil's hiding in us, because it is it's not like it's the ultimate kind of, our ego's so absorbed, and it's like that's actually like, well, other things with like greed and like lust, you have to go out and get those externally. Pride is like within you, and it's like he's actually got inside of you. uh, so yeah, that's some more thoughts for you.
Well, like, think about it this way, right? Just to touch on your point on London versus living rurally, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. Where is the community on a tube? It is non-existent. It is a bunch of individuals from different walks of life squashed together, and no one talks to each other or even acknowledges each other's existence. If there's a conversation or a bit of laughter or a bit of happiness on that tube, it is a rarity. It is seen as an anomalous event. And compare that to our hometowns, right? Where pretty much everyone knows each other, and you'll go downtown and, there's people cheersing drinks and chatting, and you know people from different walks of life. They're like, yeah, I don't know. I remember I have friends that spent time in a rural part of Northern Ireland for a while, right? And they said that everyone you says hello and good morning and waves at you and stuff. That doesn't happen in London. And I think you've pointed something out brilliantly about the materialist capitalist world we live in, silently whispering this narrative of self over community, self over community. It's about your career. It's about your life. It's about what you have. Um, and obviously that those things have got us material wealth and comfort in the culture that me and you are lucky enough to live in. But I don't think it serves us spiritually. And that's why it worries me that if people don't have some kind of faith system, and I use that term to encapsulate religions and spirituality together, if you don't have a faith system that shows you the dangers of self-prioritization, then you can fall into a very dark rabbit hole. And maybe that's why, there was a set of surveys, I think in 2023, and the UK was put as the second least happiest country, and it had like over 100 countries from across the world. I can kind of see the connection there,
Mm,
because there's not a lot of difference between thinking about yourself and negative emotion. And it seems that a lot of this system is just about how you get yourself into a good position.
mm,
Whereas, maybe where our ancestors' time, when the basic structures of the human psyche were first formed, it was about serving the community. Everyone had their role in the tribe, and I'm putting my evolutionary psychology hat on here, which is kind of very unscientific, but it just makes sense in my head that we worked with each other more. And you look at other parts of the world, Eastern cultures and things, they're very community focused. And I don't know if we've gone, the devil's slithered his way into our system. Um, and maybe that's quite a controversial thing to say, but I think you need to have awareness of this stuff, because I mean, this pride thing, May, is something I learned this week, and it's been in my head a lot, because I'm like, I am so prideful about things, and I thought I was like doing good, and that my life's pretty comfortable, and like I have some pretty good habits, and I avoid the bad habits. I don't vape, I don't drink, I don't like spend loads of time on TikTok and stuff, but the devil kind of sneaks in and makes me think I'm better than other people for that. And that's no different than being that person investing in that vice. And it's so hard to, especially be an athlete and not get possessed by pride. That is something I'm going to figure out over the next few months and really put some effort into, like reading and writing about. Yeah, I'll pause there.
mm. It is. it's courageous for you to admit that because I think a lot of people feel the same. They're aware that they have pride, and it's it is it's so like temptatious. It's I think along this maybe comes I was trying to think about why there's a lot of attention on this kind of snake archetype, which I think it is obviously attributed to Harry Potter, but also the Garden of Eden and things like that. And it's because I think this energy it does sort of kind of sliver in. It's slimy. It sticks. It's
Yeah, well, I think that is a lot also that our our more primate ancestors are one of our biggest predators was snakes. So there's that kind of it's deep in our fucking nervous system to be afraid of reptiles. And don't reptiles seem like the kind of cold-blooded like category of animal? Like your crocodiles, your Komodo dragons and shit. Like they're cold-blooded killers. They'll eat you and they won't care. And it makes and that's why it makes sense that the devil is a snake in the Garden of Eden. If the devil was a butterfly, you'd be a bit confused. But because he's a snake, it makes sense.
yeah. Uh, I think to kind of conclude, I guess one thing I think to point out is some people are misunderstood for being villains. Like I liked your example with Snape because I haven't really thought about that before. About yeah, he was Snape was a misunderstood guy, right? Because Harry Potter thought that he was like sort of causing evil in Hogwarts and after Hagrid or whatever. And he's a bit of a shady guy. He acts quite reptilian, but
Mm.
he's not. He's actually sort of helping them in the first couple episodes, and that he now that's maybe a sacrifice. That's one of the sacrifices of a hero is that you have to be courageous enough to kind of die and be hated
Well,
and be misunderstood.
in Snape's example, he was still fueled by his emotional wound that he loved Harry's mum, right? He loved Harry's mum. And Harry's dad was a dickhead to him, basically, and stole his girl and all that kind of stuff. And Snape was still experiencing the pain from that. But um, even though on the surface he was very rude and obnoxious and spiteful, he he had a dark past, right? He was a his Death Eater, I think that's the word of like Voldemort's followers. Like he had darkness in him. But in the later stages, he was like Dumbledore's like inside man on Voldemort and turned good. And it's the ultimate anti-hero redemption arc. And it's just a shame. Well, maybe it's not a shame. Maybe it's fucking brilliant writing that we only find that out when he dies. You know?
Mm. I'm keeping on what we're saying here, and I'm connecting it to my next point. So what I'm kind of trying to transfer over is we've identified here that a lot of this materialism capitalism cycle is serving the self, and we want to be more serving the community. So then the logical extent is communism or something like that. And this thought arises around my point because I was walking past some of these guys from the uni communist society the other day, and I was thinking like, what are you guys doing? And they were essentially campaigning around. They were campaigning against this sort of hoarding of power and wealth, and how power and wealth belongs to the hands of a few, which is fair. It's a fair problem, and there's there's something in our conversation which has pointed us towards communism. However, it's wrong to blame capitalism because I think that capitalism is actually a feature of every production system ever. I think that this competition is genetically wired into human beings. I think it's what human beings actually are. And there's a couple concepts that explain this. So there's something called the Pareto distribution, which is essentially, if you imagine a graph, it essentially says that a couple people are going to be very successful and a very small amount of people are going to be hyper successful. They're going to have everything. The rest have almost nothing. And
What I know of the Pareto distribution, isn't it like 20% of the inputs acquire 80% of the outputs type vibe? It's like I see it in like productivity and business like that. And there's this idea that, yeah, like it came from because I know I did this for a YouTube video back in the day, looking at who Pareto was. And it was a guy who observed that like the majority of the housing and the land ownership where he lived was owned by a couple of people, and the majority or a minority of the restaurants had the majority of customers. And he used all these real world examples to show that the minority holds the attention and the power of the majority. Okay, carry on. I just wanted to add that bit.
So with Pareto, every production system ever is like this. So I've got examples here. If you have 10,000 philosophers, 100 of them write half the books.
Mm,
Of 300 R&B singers, 10 of them produce half the music that's played.
yes.
Essentially, I think it was the square root of the number has half of X,
Yeah.
essentially, half of whatever production
This is
system.
this is something I remember Peterson talking about with the Matthew principle. There's a line uh, in Matthew in the Bible that says something like, To those who have everything, more will be given. To those who have nothing, more will be taken." And that's me paraphrasing and really like bullshitting that. But yeah, it was stuff. It was he lists some facts, something like a small minority of stars have the most number of mass. A small number of artists make all the money. A small number of music artists have the most number of plays. A small number of podcasts have the most number of listeners. A small amount of athletes are paid the most money, or score the most goals, or make the most 3-pointers, or whatever you want to look at. That is a fundamental like aspect of human nature. So I like that you're talking about this. Carry on.
That's what the distinction needs to be, because we need to take it from it's capitalism's fault to that is the part of human nature. That's what what the guys at uni didn't understand. And so we've got these three things essentially. We've got the law of 80-20, we have the Pareto distribution, and we have the Matthew principle. They're all saying the same thing. One is from a religious text, one is from kind of mathematics.
Philosopher, mathematics. Yeah.
And I guess my point here was, I guess, trying to understand how you see things and how we can form a solution around this, because we've just identified that serving the community is the way forward. But if if this is how the world works, and how resources and production is distributed, then it's very hard to serve. Like, how do you not kind of go after it and try and
Mm.
serve itself and get in this? Because I think to be a human is hard, right? And if you're not extremely competent, like, is your life really that good if you're the people that are losing in this? If you're just sort of if you're just one of those people that are caught up in it and you're in the middle of it. And I look at the statistics for the amount of Gen Z people that don't have meaning. I look at the mental health statistics. I look at how happy really are people that aren't winning. Because by definition, a lot of people aren't really winning.
Mm.
And because my solution is kind of what we've been speaking against. Is individual excellence, which that's my solution. Because but that maybe I don't know how that aligns with serving yourself, because you kind of are. You're trying to make yourself more and more excellent. And the problem with that is I don't think people can rise to it. I think a lot of people serve themselves and fail. So I mean, for example, like Pearson uses this sort of statistics and how it uses the U.S. Armed Force statistics and says, in the United States Armed Forces, they don't accept people that have an IQ lower than 83, which is 10% of the population.
Mm.
So 10% people, like, how can they compete? Um, and like, but even if you're like an intelligent uni student and you're conscious enough to put your focus into something and you have an okay hand in life, the odds are still massively stacked against you. So it's a hard question, but maybe we can come to a solution about what do you do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very worthwhile discussion, and maybe we won't come to a right out answer today, but it's worth just like digging through the weeds and trying to figure it out. And I like what you've pointed out there because it's true. What do we do about the in unequal distribution of skills to people? And my knowledge of communism and why it doesn't work comes from reading George Orwell's Animal Farm, which I suggest anyone listening to read, because everything starts off all rosy in the farm when the farmer's taken down and the animals take control. But it's the pigs who have an unequal distribution of intelligence that then manipulate and exploit all the other animals. And communism doesn't work because, like you say, there is something innate in human nature to compete. We are an animal, we are a creature, like we were out in the savannah. And can you imagine trying to explain communism to like hyenas when they catch a kill and they're like, no, you have to give 50% of your food to the other pack of hyenas across the savannah. They just like eat your arm off and tell you to go away. Like we our animal structures that are so deep in us, our nervous system, and the core of what makes us an animal and a living being is to compete and to survive, because that is how we survive and reproduce and exist. And so we now are in a position where, because of those animal roots, we have to find a spiritual solution to still play that game, but play it ethically. And
Mhm.
I think maybe the answer is something to do with your like the ethical principles you have for playing the capitalist game, or like the spirit that possesses you to do it. Because, like, yeah, I think about this a lot, Jacob. I'm like, how can you be, in my context, how can you be a good athlete without pride and without ego? Jesus, that's a tough question. It might take me my whole career to try and answer, because even when I think I'm doing it to serve others, I love it when I score points. I love it when I post somebody up. I love it when I drive on somebody and beat them with the ball and take a layup. There is a primal part of me that enjoys that. And
You
is
got
that that's
yeah.
it. Like what and like what do we do about that? Because I've written before and I'm like, the only times that I hate being an athlete is when I don't like live up to my own expectations or someone defeats me. But that's all ego games. That's all ego expectations. And the solution I'm trying to come to, and I think I've come to it, but maybe what's more difficult is applying it and acting it out and being it in the world, is playing the game, but being possessed by love and and a sort of like being possessed by an ethical spirit, the Holy Spirit, this sort of unconditional love for others and appreciation for others. And it's not about me as an individual. It's not about my pride or my ego. It's about playing the game. And it's like like giving back to the powers that be for giving me this body and this mind and these skills, giving back to them through pursuing that mastery best I possibly can. And in that, trying to bring as many others as I can with me, like giving it much wisdom as I can to people that are, are less experienced than me, and learning from my elders and people with more experience, and listening to coaches intently and trying to put their wisdom into practice. But it's a really hard thing to do, because on the same side, I still have to compete and score more points than this team to win, or I have to be better than this guy to get selected for this squad, or to play minutes, or to like it's really difficult, because life is a competition that seems like you need to be playing for yourself. But if you play for yourself, even if you win, you won't get what you want. You have to play for others too. And maybe something's just popped into my mind that may be able to put things together. Is I was still thinking the other day about this idea that it's not about whether you win or lose, it's about how you play the game. And I think that philosophy that we tell children when they first start playing sport or playing games should be applied to the whole of human life. It's not about like who has more money or who has more power or who has more skills or more competence or whatever. It should be about what do they do with that at whatever level you're at. Because you can be a beautiful, moral, peaceful, loving human being, whatever you do. The problem is we see one thing as better than another. And that's purely fueled by ego and pride. I don't know. This is a really good question though, because neither extremes are the right like option. Complete self prioritization. No, communism doesn't work because of human nature. Right? How the fuck do we square that circle? Do you know what I mean?
Because if you're a someone that an athlete that has no self-service, then you're not going to be picked in the right squads. You're not going to have time to prove
Yeah.
yourself.
Or you're going to be too nice.
Yeah, there's the nice guy kind of problem here is that comes in. And I think that we can actually move towards differentiating self-service and individual excellence, because maybe
Mm.
individual excellence, because I think that's one of the key dilemmas here. Maybe a part of individual excellence is impact and influence, and how h and there's more to it than self-competence. Maybe for me, individual excellence would be to delegate and create opportunities for people and employment for people, and maybe they are still working under the same company as me, but you're working as a team, and 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 is for something higher. And so I think we can think about what's the difference between a villain in basketball and a hero in basketball. I think
Yeah.
you'll me. What's the difference between maybe a villain salesman and a hero salesman?
Mm.
And I actually can point to maybe an answer from my context, because from my experience in sales, there were I know I can see people sort of manipulating an old woman who just wants a conversation and getting a sale out of them when it's not really the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I can also see someone that's extremely playful. There's this one sales guy that uh, there's one sales guy that I used to be friends with who had just the best one-liners and was the funniest person to everyone. Like there'd be someone he'd knock on someone's door and they'd answer from the window, and he'd be like, "Rapunzel, let down your hair," to kind of like referencing like how she's
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
down. And I'd make her laugh, and he'd then just speak to her like a little bit, and she'd come down, and it'd be that she'd be laughing, and she'd then speak about life and how her sort of cousin's doing and whatever. And he didn't need to get the sale; he just wanted the conversation. And then she get let in the house, you have a cup of tea, and you go to the next house. I worked a door-to-door sales job for people listening, and so there's two different approaches, and maybe not being outcome focused comes into it. Um, I mean, from your context, from the basketball context, I think of a villain in wheelchair basketball as someone that wants everything to. It's someone who prioritizes the self over the team.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Who wants them to be clipped in a nice way and look good in front of people, and
Yes.
all the good stats. They want the assists. They want the numbers, but
Mm.
they prioritize the team winning. Don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay, this is really interesting. So what we're saying is there's an ethical way to win and there's an unethical way to win. And this is winning in the broadest term. This is winning a sports match. This is selling a product to that person. This is rising up the dominance hierarchy in whatever organization you're in. This is, building your own business and getting your startup off the ground, winning in the human game, in the human life. There's an ethical way to do it. There's an unethical way to do it. The unethical way to do it is serving your ego. It's just serving the self. And if you need to push others down to do that, you will. And you want to look good for you. And you're fueled by this villainous emotional wound um, that causes you to prioritize the self over the community. But I think there is also an ethical way to win. I think about the basketball player who is willing to have 0 points and but play and create for others to win the game. I think of elite role players that I know in my game, or you can think about that in the in the NBA, people who are more sort of well versed in that world, players who don't do the flashy shit, but will play great defense and set great screens and set great picks and do great off ball movement, off ball work for the scorers to do what they do, and then the people that go under the radar. But they still win. And I also think you can be a scorer and you can be a star and do it ethically as well. Because the whole time you have to keep in mind that you can only do what you can do because of the four other players around you and because of the role players and because of the bench screaming for your team and because of the coaches you've had across your whole career and because your mum drove you to those training sessions when you were just a kid and because of the influences and the fact you stand on the shoulders of giants of great other players that come before you. I think you can do that. And I think you can apply that away from sports to anything else. We stand on the shoulders of giants in anything we do. All of our successes, yes, they require individual dedication and discipline and ambition, but we couldn't do any of it without our parents or our mentors or the 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 lucky and privileged hands that we were dealt to get to where we are. We are we are a manifestation of all of those things that we've used our will and our ambition to bring into the world. Um, and maybe then the most important thing is how you play the game, the spirit that possesses you, the ethics behind your win. Um, and I think that's what separates the successful villain from the hero. But the tough thing is, right, in a social media world, it's very easy for villains to signal ethics in their wins when maybe they're not as ethical in real life in the way they do it. But this is why it excites me, Jacob, because I think this is what my life's work in my 20s is going to be. How do you win without selling your soul? Because competition, to me, exists in opposition to a spiritually healthy life. But can we find a way to combine both?
Mm. I think maybe us doing it for the team will automatically do it for you as
Mm.
well. Be-
Yes.
I think, yes, you pointed out that there will be basketball players that have nice moments on social media where it looks like they're amazing and they're the best on the team.
Yeah.
Is there I don't know if Draymond Green's the best example, but I can just pick him out because he's someone that maybe focuses on a lot of his games on defenses, which is a lot flashy than a sort of Steph Curry who's looking at the
Yeah.
game three. And how I don't know if someone like him was to be in a basketball team and was to essentially like his game was a lot of protecting the basketball. But he's maybe you don't see him scoring like step back threes. However, his name still as is great is attributed to the rest of the Golden State Warriors, and which kind of makes selects him and hires him as an individual. I think there is something to that where you where when you do something for the greater good of the team, individual excellence will stem around that because also your teammates will really like you and
Mm.
they give you credit.
Yeah.
And I think the next question, because we can take that approach. We can say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to play the game ethically. The next question is, how do you play the game ethically and be fucking really good, really, like a
Yeah.
actual
Because do you think that the there's an asymmetry where the person playing the game unethically is more likely to win? Because if you watch The Last Dance, that documentary on Michael Jordan in the last season where they won their sixth championship, like the way he talks to his teammates at training, I would hate to be his teammate. And he is the greatest of all time, right? There's debates around that, but I think general consensus he's the greatest of all time, at least in his era, anyway. But was he a good person? Did he do it ethically? I, what do you think about that question? Are the unethical people more swayed? Because I was even talking to like my girlfriend's dad this morning about like how politics may select for people that are psychotic and narcissistic because they're better at playing the game, even though they're playing it unethically.
I think the answer to that question is there's Ronaldo people and there's Messi people, and you can still be a messy person, achieve like I'm assuming that Messi is an ethically good individual here.
Hmm.
But I think that example is they're both as good or on the kind of same, they're both in their own category of just them two. And I think there is the Ronaldo person's maybe more likely to win.
Mm,
But if you're very I don't know enough about Messi, unfortunately, but I just assume that he's quite spiritually a good person. I feel like he's earned sort of the greatness title, and I feel like he hasn't sold his soul to do so. And maybe I'm not saying Ronaldo has, but Ronaldo, I feel like is way more ego possessed.
or we can just use them. We can extract out the archetypes and go because there's not a lot of there's not as many, I guess, interviews around Messi, and he doesn't speak English, so a lot of the world doesn't really. Ronaldo is everywhere in terms of media and everything. Like he's done the interview. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm not really a football fan, so I don't really know. But Messi seems to be a bit more introverted. So maybe we'll just extract out the archetypes and go. Um, there's one side of it is a very kind of boisterous, in your face, arrogant, I'm going to beat you athlete, and there's the athlete that is quiet and takes their time and will just play for the love of the game. Um, and I think that both can win, but it's just you have to have a whole like level of mental resilience to not rise up to the trash talk of a narcissistic player. It's really difficult because it comes back to that pride thing. Like, am I motivated to train because I want to look good and I want people to think I'm good at basketball? I mean, that's a scary question to ask myself. Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is that's the majority of it. And if that's the case, I really need to look myself in the mirror and like be like, is that how I want to live my life?
Mm.
Um, because there's a there is a more ethical spirit that can possess you. It's just so hard. It's so hard to develop it. But I guess if it wasn't hard, it wouldn't be valuable.
Yeah. I I mean, I think when you isolate yourself like this, and you can ask that yourself the question, I think s- so many people have not figured that out. Everyone has not figured that out because a lot of people's, especially initial reason, is because of insecurity and they want external praise. And I mean, I could admit to it too. Even like there'd be, I mean, there's multiple reasons for doing a podcast, but one of them would be external, kind of
Yes.
looking smart,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
that I it's a reason.
And we can signal the fact of, oh, it's a self-development tool and we just want to talk to interesting people and learn things, but like, no, it's cool to have followers. It's cool to
Yeah.
sound smart. It's cool for people to go, that's interesting. It's cool to have knowledge and like display that knowledge. And I would be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying when we pin ideas together and sound good. I mean, it's one of those where maybe one of the first answers is to just notice it and be like, well, is that the best intention I can use in this situation? Because we're all imperfect creatures, and we're never going to flick a switch and be so like morally virtuous. But just noticing it and being like, well, is that the intention I want to have? And one thing I just thought of that I forgot previously, that I think is important. Going back to your sales example, I think the way you ethically win there is if your offer is as good, if not like, or the product is what the offer is getting across, if not better. Like I was thinking about this morning, Spotify is a massive corporation, and I'm not sure about their ethics on whatever and the way they run their company, but I never complain about like paying for Spotify because it's an unbelievable product. It gives me access to all the music I could possibly want to listen to all the time with no adverts. Amazing. So I never complain as if like about the fact they've won the capitalist game because their product is actually good. Like if you sell someone something that actually serves them, then that selling is not unethical. It's unethical if you're selling them something they don't need, that doesn't actually do what it says on the tin.
And we are all our own products, and we're selling ourselves.
Yes, and that's why I think actually we get heat on like podcast clips and stuff because I understand it. Like when I watch back the podcast clips, I cringe at myself because 1 minute taken out of context, I sound I know what I'm on about. I don't know what I'm on about. And if people listen to the longer form episodes, they realize that we're just trying to figure this shit out. But look at this fucking young guy that thinks he knows what he's talking about and thinks he's fucking read Nietzsche or knows Carl Jung. Like it's just, but it's really hard to grow something and not look like that delusional individual because one
Mhm.
day you might turn around and people go, oh god, he's been saying the same stuff for 10 years, maybe he's onto something. But you kind of have to, I have to know in myself that I'm trying to play the game ethically, and that comes from my own self-work.
I think we're doing a good job. I mean, our most popular hate comment right now, and has been for a while, is this hate comment that is like, "It's not that deep, guys."
Mm.
Well, and that's kind of us like putting our product out there and trying to sell it, and there's someone that is not right for,
Yeah.
because not everyone's gonna like it.
And that
Um,
comment is just like when you were doing door-to-door sales and you speak to the person and they just weren't having it and they close the door on you, or the door that just doesn't answer. And I think that's okay as well, because isn't it a prideful thought that everyone should like what we do? I mean, that's
mhm,
stupid. I don't like mint choc chip ice cream, but I think it should exist. Do you know what I mean? It's like if it's fine. I don't need everyone to like me. In fact, I don't need anyone to like me. I like doing this. And I like the pursuit of self mastery and the skill of verbal articulation and the ideas we discuss on the podcast make me better at life.
mm.
And that has to be our North Star.
I think something that would actually very valuable, that I think we should both, but especially you should do, is to isolate a couple individuals, like maybe Messi, or people that I think that you think are world class, and try and understand how they keep their spiritual side to them as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I want to talk to Novak Djokovic one day. I know that sounds delusional for me to even say that, but from what I've heard on interviews with him and, things that I know, one day I'd love to get a conversation with him.
mhm. Yeah, I think because also when you're like really good, like so you're a really good basketball player, it's hard to have something that like knocks you off a bit. That kind of that when you're the guy, it's like when there's no one that's kind of like maybe there'll still be people that are leagues and they're leagues ahead of you, but you have respect and you come to a sort of a status where there's not the obstacle is you can overcome it because you're that good a product, and so what's there to humble you kind of thing.
Yes.
And and therefore I think someone like Djokovic would point to something like a cold plunge or a sauna because that's a way to humble you.
Yeah.
So I think having these things that constantly humble you, I think that's why perhaps like an artist gets really good and then they're so good that they then move to acting is because they've kind of won that game and they want another challenge to kind of learn and stuff. Otherwise they're just kind of they're being reminded how good they are the whole time, and also that's kind of not fun. I think that's part of it actually, that we need some things to humble us in life.
Yes. Yes. Humility. Humility is a superpower because in the absence of humility, you are you are King Midas from the Greek myth. You know that one I told you about before, where he makes this bargain with a god, and so everything he touches turns to gold. And we talk about that as a metaphor for people that are really good at something. Oh, everything he touches turns to gold. But in that example, he then goes to like eat some food or drink a glass of wine or hold his baby daughter's hand, and it all turns to gold, and it no longer serves its function. It's like getting so good at something without humility, you can't really relate to people anymore. You're just in your own lane, and with this self, this self so inflated and so prioritized that you lose connection. You lose community. You're estranged from the community yet again, and you've worked for years and decades and thousands of hours, but you're estranged just like the villain is. And so humility connects you with the truth of it, that you stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's about how you serve others. Um, but the competition versus pride, pride, and the sort of devil whispering in your ear thing, that's it's a complicated problem. But I think I've really enjoyed this today.
Well, the problem with turning things constantly into gold, is say you become a great basketball player and opportunities just come your way, and it's like you then turn things to gold that you don't really want to, and people recognize that, so they start trying to extract things from you. They take from you essentially. You become a kind of you become a name that people want to make money from, or you become basically someone that people can use.
Yeah,
And I think that is where more problems essentially come from. People want your gold, right? They want a bit of that, and suddenly you have s- um, more problems. You have more attention on you, which can give more positive and negative stuff. It's like maybe you're more of a target for sort of scams and hackers and things like that. Because people know that you're obviously a successful individual and you have an online presence, and maybe someone tries to. You're more of a target essentially. When you have gold, people look and people are attracted to that gold,
yeah.
and not those people are going to be have good intentions, and some of them are going to have very bad intentions.
Yeah, and I think that's why, maybe to just like conclude this, like winning ethically point, is that's why one of my like mantras these days, that I didn't mean to sort of become a mantra, but it has one, is um like Lao Tzu's quote of, before enlightenment chop wood carry water, after enlightenment chop wood carry water, which is like a call to humility and focus on the process. And washing the dishes after I make my scrambled eggs in the morning is as important as the shots I take in the game on Saturday. It's life. Like, life is just a series of behaviors. And if you stick to the process and doing the process right and treating it with respect and with gratitude, that's how you win ethically. As soon as it becomes like me versus them, I want to look good, or to use Aaron, the architect we had on a couple of weeks ago, if it's to walk down the path of comparison, then you're going to get into a psychological hell. On the other side is the path of exploration of, what can I find within myself to master this thing, and how can I inspire others and give people an offer that actually serves them, and sell them a product that makes their life better rather than worse. And it's hard, but that's a great North Star to have as part of the hero's journey, I think.
Mhm. Um, yeah, that's pretty perfectly said. I just want to lastly answer the question that I tried to answer, but I didn't really answer it. Of we're going to say we and people listening want to figure out how to play the game ethically, and we're going to be in the pursuit to do that. Cool. How do you become really good to play this game of where things like the law of 80/20 and the Matthew principle exist? I think for a lot of people listening, and maybe including myself, um, I don't think. Well, with that, we're going to try and aim for the top to be in the top 1% of the whatever production system we're going for. S But the reality is a lot of us are not gonna get there, and I think a good question to answer is how do you get there? And for me, I found the answer in something that I casually kind of brought up the other week of how why exactly do the A students work for the C students? Because that's actually quite an interesting question. And
What do you mean by that?
so when I so what I mean by that is there's when I look at an A student, they have incredible individual competence. You know, there's people that would get the highest grades on the test in my course that are sharp guys. Like there's this Asian guy called Nick who I sit next to in some lectures, and he's a sharp guy. Um, he has a lot of individual competence, but I get a feeling with some of these A students that they're not going to own a business. And I think I think there's a couple of reasons for this. But essentially, what I mean by that is the sort of distinction for some people to get really good academically and really good in that system, perform really well in those results, which I kind of label as A students, and C students I kind of label as people that get sort of average. And it's kind of weird how these people have like who have the best sort of CVs and they have the best grades. I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I think it's what I resonates to me is that these people that get the best grades work for people that don't have the best grades, that are kind of get average grades. And I'm trying and to figure out why. I think it's that Asians are quite like I think one thing is that they maybe possess traits that are obedient, right? So they're very obedient to the system. And
Mm.
when you're obedient to the system that constantly that is designed when you're obedient to the system that you're designed that's designed for you, you're less risk tolerant. So you don't want to really look anywhere else. You want to stay in the lane that's designed for you. And what does the system reward? Which, but okay, so you're obedient and you're not very risk tolerant. That's a problem because what the system rewards is delegation, leverage, and kind of risk
Outside of the box thinking, outside of convention, outside of the rules kind of action and thoughts.
which is not what an A student possesses in their traits. And maybe C students, then they're not so good academically because they're focusing their attention on other ways to get there quicker. They're the ones that start the side hustles. They're the ones that realize that uni is, in their words, maybe a scam, and so they get to that place quicker. So it's, I think it's also it's obviously IQ is a big part of individual success, right? And maybe there's a part of it that you can say maybe um, you're going to need a strong IQ. You're going to need to be conscientious. That is things that distinguish individuals. And if but what we need to realize is that it's not how hard you work; it's what work you do. And to live in a meritocracy is to realize that you win by knowing what work to do, and therefore you need to build leverage and sort of get some other people on board, and you need to delegate things to other people because working in teams is so much stronger when you're just sort of really good academically. Maybe I don't know. You're it's just about you and your individual competence, maybe, and how that relates to the system.
I guess
And
the games are optimizing for different skill sets. The education system game and the business game or the personal development game require different skill sets. And so that's maybe why there's an asymmetry across like people that do well in one field compared to another. It makes
yeah,
sense.
I mean, or you get anomalies like yourself who goes to 0 lectures and gets 90.
But that's I did a lot of time absolutely bum sweating academically. Like I kind of had to really learn the rules of the game in order to break them. You know, like I wouldn't suggest what I do at university to other people, and I can only get away with it because my university is not very good academically. Um, but yeah, we're running out of time here, but I just want to finish on this one final thing that I thought of, and it goes back to the quote from the Bible that the meek will inherit the earth, and the like original meaning of meek in that context that Peterson outlined in his biblical lectures, where he said it means to like wield a very sharp sword but keep it sheathed. And maybe that is kind of a great metaphor for this ethical way to win. Is you sharpen your sword, you have this weapon at your disposal that you can whip out at any time to win in a situation on the basketball court, in that important business meeting, in that networking event, that public speaking gig, whatever that project you're working on, you have a great weapon, but the majority of the time you keep it sheathed. You're not shoving it in other people's faces and going, look how big my sword is, look how scared you should be. You keep it sheathed and you know it's there, but you don't need to act pridefully and sort of display it onto others. And that is why that type of individual will inherit the earth, because they have the power but not the ego that will lead to their own destruction in the end.
Mm. I think that's a good way to finalize that. Um, you need to go.
I do need to go. Yes.
Okay. We didn't. I wanted to get through your other point, but
That's all right, bro. We can move it to next week. This was one of my favorite Jacob and Joel episodes. I think one of your best performances ever
well,
in terms of coherence.
thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed this listening. Let us know if this is indeed one of your favorite Jake and Joe episodes, and if it was, and you haven't already left a 5-star review on Spotify, feel free to do so. Thank you.
Um,